Welcome to the Athenaeum Symposia. I am Joan Naik, Acting Dean of Humanities and Social Sciences and Education at the Germantown campus, and we are delighted to have you here. Without an audience, it doesn't matter who the speaker is, so we are thrilled to have you here. I'm often asked why we call it the Athenaeum Symposia, and one of the reasons, of course, is that the Athenaeum in ancient Greece was the site of the Temple of Athena, where much learning and education took place. And since we see these events as being the ultimate in learning and educating ourselves, we decided to call it Athenaeum. Symposia comes from the ancient Greek idea of intellectual discussion, and you will have an opportunity tonight to have an intellectual discussion with the author during our question and answer period, and we ask you to come up to the microphone on either side and ask questions. Professor Haydel, whom I'll talk about in just a moment, is going to be introducing the speaker, but I want you to know that after the end of the talk and after the questions and answers, we will also have a book signing at the top of Globe Hall where you came in. So without further ado, because I know your main interest is in listening to the speaker, I would like to introduce, and by the way, I particularly want to welcome MCHC, the Maryland Collegiate Honors Conference, and our wonderful honors director, Dr. Lucy Loff, who is sitting there. I know that many of you are here because you are participating in that conference, and we're delighted to have you. And next, I'd like to introduce Jennifer Haydel, who is director of the Renaissance Scholars Program, does a wonderful job in in organizing all of our very intellectually stimulating and challenging dyads, and has just recently arranged a marvelous summer trip, an intellectual summer trip for the Renaissance scholars. So without further ado, Jennifer Haydel, Professor Haydel.
I'm incredibly honored to be able to introduce to you Vaddey Ratner. She's the author of an incredibly thought-provoking and powerful novel called In the Shadow of the Banyan. As a young child, she experienced the Khmer Rouge coming to power in Cambodia, and she and her mother survived and came to the United States as refugees in 1981. Vaddey Ratner specialized in Southeast Asian history and literature at Cornell University. In recent years, she's been able to travel back to Cambodia and to live in Cambodia for a time, using those experiences to help her write and to research this novel. In the Shadow of the Banyan has received critical acclaim and became a New York Times bestseller. Vaddey Ratner has spoken across the country at a huge number of events, ranging from the Baltimore City College One Book, One City program to the Penn World Voices Festival of International Literature. In the Shadow of the Banyan was also recently named a finalist for the 2013 Penn Hemingway Literary Award. Chris Cleave, author of Little Bee, writes the following of In the Shadow of the Banyan. He says, "In the Shadow of the Banyan is one of the most extraordinary and beautiful acts of storytelling I have ever encountered. This book pulls off the unsettling feat of being at the same time utterly heartbreaking and impossibly beautiful. There are moments in this story that are among the most powerful in literature. This is a masterpiece that takes us to the highs and lows of what human beings can do in this life, and it leaves us correspondingly both humbled and ennobled." Please join me in welcoming Vaddey Ratner.
Thank you all for coming. It's quite an honor for me to be here this evening, knowing that it's the beginning of the weekend, and here you are. So I am very, very honored. I would like to express my heartfelt gratitude and thanks to the organizer of the Symposia series, in particular Professor Joan Naik and Professor Margaret Latimer and Professor Jennifer Heidel. We've just been introduced, and your colleagues and students for hosting me and providing me this opportunity to speak with you. It's such a privilege and an honor to be invited to speak here tonight again. I cannot reiterate that enough. So thank you all for joining me. As you have heard, today is a very special day for me because my novel In the Shadow of the Banyan was announced as a finalist for the PEN Hemingway Award. This is the most important award for the first book of fiction in the US. I'm honored and humbled and still, frankly, stunned by this wonderful news. When I set out to write, I never imagined that the words I so painfully labored over would gain this kind of recognition. Though the distinction is intended to signal the literary quality of a debut work of fiction, in essence, a writer's voice, I can't help but feel that in my case it is also an acknowledgement of the power and the dignity of those silenced voices I have endeavored to honor in this novel. I will begin my talk. Sometimes we enter art to hide within it, writes Michael Ondaatje in Divisadero. It is where we can go to save ourselves. I am often asked why I wrote In the Shadow of the Banyan as a novel instead of a memoir. It is, after all, a story about my family's ordeal during the Khmer Rouge regime. In the span of those 4 years, from 1975 to 1979, amidst starvation, disease, forced labor, and systematic execution, I grew from a 5-year-old child into a 9-year-old adult, forced into maturity not by the small pleasurable gains of an ordinary growing up, but by the losses of home, family, and country. While an estimated 1.7 million Cambodians perished, among them many of my family members, I survived. This fact alone I cannot escape. However, I tell the story as autobiography or fiction. It's true that as a writer, I have sometimes sought the enclosure of my art for its comfort and protection. I have slipped into it both to hide and to be rescued. But as a survivor, I feel I enter art to save, to immortalize those I could not protect as a child. Writing In the Shadow of the Banyan, even as I was conscious that the context is war and revolution and inhumanity on an epic scale, the story I wanted to tell is a deeply personal one. I had to delve within myself, and there in the abyss of that experience, I knew I would not be shielded, but must once again stand exposed to the atrocity and destruction. I wasn't sure if I could relive the ordeal, let alone pull the reader through with me. So approaching the story, I had to imagine myself in the reader's place. What if I were someone who knew very little or nothing about Cambodia? What if all I had heard in some generalized way was its history of violent conflicts and murderous regimes? I would want something more significant, more potent than sorrow and suffering. Beauty, however elusive, to sustain me through the loss and tragedy of this wartime narrative. In reality, it was the small glimpses of beauty that sustained me as a child. It kept me fighting at times when it seemed much easier to give up. So I wanted the same for the reader, to see beauty where I saw it, in literature and poetry and music, in the architecture and landscape of that lost world. And I thought the most natural, least intrusive way was through the writing itself. I wanted the language of In the Shadow of the Banyan to be lyrical, reflective, a meditation on life, love, and language, that which connects us as human beings, this ability not only to articulate the mundane and the factual, but the metaphorical and the emotional. Yet, even as I chose a fictional landscape with the twists and turns of our journey rearranged, the towns and villages altered and renamed, the family members resurrected and imbued with qualities at once familiar and new, I didn't want to veer from the truth of that experience. If anything, I searched for it, hungered for some kind of understanding, some insight into the incomprehensible. I may never find it, the answer to the senselessness. But often when I think of my father, his determination to meet his demise with dignity, I console myself with the thought that he died for truth. I often think of Emily Dickinson's poem, I died for beauty, but was scarce adjusted in the tomb, when one who died for truth was lain in an adjoining room. Beauty and truth are one, Emily Dickinson reminds us. In moments when I am burdened by my survival, when I think how my father forfeited his life to give me mine, I would like to believe that some part of me lives and strives for the beauty he wanted me to see. And however, I failed as a child to protect those I loved, I would like to believe that through art, through my endeavor to reach for it, I have made them live again. I have chosen several passages that hopefully will give a sense of the trajectory of the narrative, as well as illustrate the larger themes of war and destruction, loss and continuity, and our indomitable will to survive. The book opens with a scene within the family household compound, a lush and beautiful setting in the Cambodian capital, Phnom Penh, or as we Americans say it, Phnom Penh. It's March 1975, and while the Civil War rages outside their gates, in fact, all over the country, it was very important to me that the story open to a more peaceful and intimate atmosphere. I wanted to give a glimpse of a world before it disappears, Cambodia before it became the killing fields. The story is told through the perspective of a child in the voice of an adult narrator inhabiting her childhood self, hence the rather mature narrative language. Rami, the 7-year-old protagonist, is the daughter of a prince and a poet, while her life so far has been one of privilege and protection. That world is now threatened, and she struggles to understand. War entered my childhood world, not with the blasts of rockets and bombs, but with my father's footsteps as he walked through the hallway, passing my bedroom toward his. I heard the door open and shut with a soft click. I slid off my bed, careful not to wake Ratna in her crib, and snuck out of my room. I pressed my ear to the door and listened. Are you all right? Mama sounded concerned. Each day before dawn, Papa would go for a solitary stroll, and returning an hour or so later, he would bring back with him the sights and sounds of the city from which would emerge the poems he read aloud to me. This morning, though, it seemed he came back as soon as he had stepped out, for dawn had just arrived and the feel of night had yet to dissipate. Silence trailed his every step like the remnant of a dream long after waking. I imagine him lying next to Mama now, his eyes closed as he listened to her voice, the comfort it gave him amidst the clamor of his own thoughts. What happened? Nothing, darling, Papa said. What is it? She persisted. A deep, long sigh. Then finally, he said, the streets are filled with people, Anna. Homeless, hungry, desperate. He paused. The bed creaked, and I imagined him turning to face her, their cheeks on the same long pillow as I had often seen. The miseries. No matter what awfulness is out there, Mama cut in gently. I know you will take care of us. Later that morning, in brightly colored silks that almost outshone the surrounding birds and butterflies, we'd gathered in the dining pavilion, an open teak house with a hardwood floor and pagoda-like roof, which stood in the middle of the courtyard among the fruit and flower trees. Before us an array of food, lotus seed porridge sweetened with palm sugar, sticky rice with roasted sesame and shredded coconut, beef noodle soup topped with coriander leaves and anise star, mushroom omelets with slices of baguette, a dish to suit everyone's morning taste. At the center of the table, sat a silver platter of mangoes and papaya, which old boy had picked from the trees behind our house, and rambutans and mangosteens which Umbao had brought from her early morning trip to the market. On the balcony of the master house, the servant girls worked on their hands and knees, waxing the floor and railings. They dripped beeswax from burning candles and rubbed it into the teakwood floor. Below them, old boy was sweeping the ground. He had dusted and wiped the spirit house so that now it stood sparkling on its golden pedestal under the banyan tree like a miniature Buddhist temple. Several long strands of jasmine adorned its tiny pillars and spires on its roof, and in front of its entrance, a clay pot filled with raw rice held 3 sticks of incense, an offering to the 3 pillars of protection, the ancestors, the Devadas, and the guardian spirits. They were all there, watching over us, keeping us out of harm's way. We had nothing to fear. Milk Mother always said, as long as we remained within these walls, the war could not touch us. Not long after this, the Khmer Rouge stormed into the city and seized control of the country. Rami and her family are forced outside of their home along with the entire urban population toward the countryside. Papa inched the BMW forward. I stretched my neck and looked into the rearview mirror. I saw the balcony, vacant and still. Had it always been like this, like no one had ever lived here? Suddenly, I realized what it was that had followed Papa into the house, trailed his footsteps like a shadow several mornings ago when he returned from his walk. It was this moment, our leaving, our being gone. We hadn't yet left, but already I saw it and felt it, what it would be like without us there. How was it possible? I didn't understand. But there it was, our prescient absence. Everything began to recede. Only old boy remained, standing by the hanging bougainvillea bush near the gate where he had always stood. He waved. I turned and waved back. He shut the gate. Outside, the streets were packed. People, cars, trucks, motorcycles, Mopeds, bicycles, cyclos, ox carts, push carts, wheelbarrows, things that shouldn't belong on the streets of a city. I couldn't have imagined a water buffalo caked with mud or an elephant carrying the mahout and his family. But there they were, part of the throngs that pushed and pulsated in every direction. Revolutionary soldiers were everywhere, dressed in black from head to toe like the one who had burst through our gate, waving their guns, ordering everyone to leave. Families poured into the streets, dragging suitcases crammed with belongings, cradling baskets stuffed with dishes and cooking pans, wooden stools, and chamber pots. A woman balanced 2 baskets on a bamboo pole over her shoulders, a child in one basket and a stove in another. We came to a huge crowd gather in front of a tall wrought iron gate, behind which I could see part of the facade of a white-pillared villa. People pushed and shoved one another, fighting to get to the entrance. Those up front banged on the iron bars, pleading to be let in. Some tried to climb over the high wall, cutting themselves on the sharp metal prongs lining the top edge. A few made it over, but most were pulled back down by the competing hordes below. 2 men punched each other, then 2 more, 3, a fight broke out. Women screamed, children whimpered and howled like puppies. A shot resounded. The crowds became suddenly still. A soldier stepped through the half-open gate, pistol held high above his head. He issued an order, waving left and right, and quickly the crowds divided to allow for a narrow path in the middle. The other soldiers standing guard began plucking out the foreigners and letting them through while pushing the Cambodians back out onto the street. Beside me, Tata murmured in disbelief, "Good God, they're doing what they said they would. They're expelling all foreigners." "Is it a diplomatic sanctuary, then?" Mama asked, turning to Papa. "A temporary one, it looks like," Papa replied, staring straight ahead at something. "They're not letting anyone in without a foreign passport." I followed his gaze to where a young couple stood a little apart from the crowd. The man was a barang, one of those white giants with hairy arms and a protruding nose. The woman, Cambodian and heavily pregnant. He was telling her something, an earnest expression hovering over her frightened one. She nodded, tears streaming down her cheeks. He took her face in his hands and pressed his lips to hers. The Khmer Rouge soldiers marched over and shouted at them. His face contorted with disgust. The barang tried to explain, my wife. His lips seemed to be saying in Khmer, but the soldier paid no attention. 2 more strode over and pulled the couple apart. The man cried out, the woman sobbed. A mob quickly came between them. Papa pushed forward with the car. I looked back, searching for the barang, but he had disappeared. I looked for his wife. She too was gone. I blinked once, then again. Still, I couldn't bring them back. They were lost, as if erased from the human landscape. Weeks into her journey, Rami and her family arrive at a temple. Here, amidst the lovely surroundings, Rami senses that even in their exile, home is still possible. That home is not constructed of walls and pillars alone, but of something more intangible. She begins to discover a home constructed of dreams and stories. Papa's eyes went to the pair of carved serpents along the balustrades. The Naga, he said, from the Sanskrit Nagara for city or kingdom, is a symbol of divine energy, our link to the heavens. This place, this land of Naga pillars and steeples and spires, was born of divine inspiration, so goes one legend among many. My favorite story is one of Malia, the son of Indra and his earthly consort. One day, the 12-year-old Malia receives an invitation from his father to visit him. Papa looked up and pointed at the carved image of a mythical creature, part human and part bird, adorning the top of every pillar of the prayer hall. Perhaps on the wings of one of those, I like to imagine. Malia ascends the heavens. It's Kinnara, I said, reminding him of the creature's name. From the countless tales I've read and heard, Kinnara could traverse back and forth between the world of the humans and that of the gods. Yes, that's right, Papa nodded, smiling. Once there, Malia gazes in awe at his father's celestial kingdom, the many-tiered steeple palaces covered with precious stones, moats and pools shimmering as if made of liquid diamonds, causeways and bridges stretching to eternity and back. You will have your own earthly kingdom, Indra says to his son, in the image of this one. Whatever you so desire here, I shall send my celestial architect to replicate it. Malia, moved by his father's generosity, dares not request a replica of Indra's own palace. Instead, he humbly asks to recreate only Indra's cattle stable. That's it, just the cattle stable. My mind was roused by the story. Papa chuckled. But even Indra's cattle stable gave rise to the great Angkor temple, which became the inspiration for all later temples that adorn this land of your birth. You see, Rami, as beautiful as this temple is, it's only a tiny, modest glimpse of what is divinely possible in all of us. We are capable of extraordinary beauty if we dare to dream. I kept quiet now, imagining Papa as Indra and myself Malia. Do you know why I named you Vatarami? He knelt on one knee and looked into my eyes. Because you are my temple and my garden, my sacred ground, and in you I see all of my dreams. He smiled, as if allowing himself the indulgence of an early morning's pondering. Perhaps it's natural for a father, for every parent, to see in his child all that's unspoiled and good. But if you can, Rami, I want you to see it in yourself. No matter what ugliness and destruction you may witness around you, I want you always to believe that the tiniest glimpse of beauty here and there is a reflection of the God's abode. It is real, Rami. There exists such a place, such sacred space. You have only to envision it, to dare to dream it. It is within you, within all of us. He straightened up again, letting out another long breath. I see it all the time. It was clear. If I looked hard enough, if I sought, I would find what I was looking for. Here on the Banyan shaded ground, the temple harbored minute reflections of the paradise we had left behind. Much later in the book, perhaps 2 years have passed, this passage contrasts the earlier lush setting of home. The silent landscape echoes Rami's fear and sense of isolation. I also wanted the sparse language to mirror the emotional stripping down of Rami's journey, so pay particular attention to the language. There is no time to mourn, no time to look back. Again, planting season came. Mama was sent to another location to dig irrigation ditches, and I was put in a youth brigade that traveled from one area to the next, planting rice. There were about 20 of us in the group, all girls, and we worked from dawn until sunset. We slept together in one hut built at the edge of the forest near our work area. Our parents, we were told, couldn't be wasted caring for us. We were not children anymore. This morning at the rice fields, a new secret guard was assigned to keep an eye on us. He paced back and forth on the narrow dike, going nowhere, eyes watching. The long gun hanging from his shoulder brushed against the ground as he walked. A black cap shaded his eyes, and the muscles of his jaw flexed in and out on clenched teeth. He tried to look older than he was. If only he knew we were afraid of him because he was so young. Around me, tiny figures in black rose and bend, up and down, a step or two back. the rhythm I could count and feel even in my sleep. We moved slowly, pushing rice shoots into the mud, bearing the stalks halfway in the water. No one sang, no one spoke, no one looked up. We were just moving figures, up and down, up and down. I could no longer tell the living from the dead. Ours was a world in between. Silence took root in my blood. I became deaf. I became mute. I thought only of the work in front of me. Standing in the paddy, I planted the rice shoots. When eating, I could think only of eating. In sleep, I thought of nothing else. Hunger made my body frail. Many times I was punished for being too lazy. Without rice, I lived on leaves and small animals found in the mud. The tiniest I would swallow at once. Sometimes I would be punished, though I could never know when. It was futile to worry, to think of tomorrow. The life I had once known was gone, and with it, the people. There was nothing to say, no one left for me to speak of, so I chose not to speak. Still I saw, still I heard. In silence I understood, and I remembered. To keep you is no gain. To kill you is no loss. Under the rules of the organization, we were reduced to this dictum. How was I to live by such words? With so many carted away with the tiniest pretense, how could any child believe she would live beyond this day, this moment? In a world of senseless death, I didn't see the purpose, couldn't grasp the meaning. If this was our collective karma, then why was I still alive? If anything, I was as guilty as those who survived and as innocent as those who died. What name, then, can I give to the force that carried me on? With each life taken away, a part of it passed on to me. I didn't know its name. All I could grasp was the call to remember. Remember, I lived by this word. Now, I would like to conclude the reading with a poem that appears in the novel in the voice of Rami's father, the poet. They say mine is a ravaged land, scarred and broken by hate, on a path to self-extermination. Yet no other place so resembles my dream of heaven. The lotus fields that cradle my home, each flower a reincarnated spirit, or perhaps like me, a child who wishes to be reborn, should dreams become possible again. Thank you. Yes.
This detours a little bit from the book, but as someone who has lived through a genocide and experienced government organizations and relief agencies, what do you believe the focus should be on, whether it be government organizations or private groups, to keep genocides from happening again, or what needs to be done when a genocide happens and what the responses should be?
You know, I always feel that when we arrive at a point when genocide is occurring, it's already too late, you know? And so, therefore, I think on the most personal level, I feel that we have to accept the reality that the capacity for both good and atrocity exists in each and every one of us, regardless of our religion, regardless of our culture, regardless of our political system. If we continue to say that genocide can only happen in this particular kind of culture, in this particular kind of government system, among these particular kind of people, and we refuse to accept that the capacity for atrocity does exist in each and every one of us, I think there's a real possibility that genocide or atrocity on that epic scale can occur again.
I don't think this is on, so is it working? I'll just talk loudly. I picked your book up randomly about 3 weeks ago from
Yes.
the Germantown Library.
Yes.
And I was amazed at the sheer beauty of it, and I want to thank you for that. It is a beautiful book.
Thank you. Thank you.
Despite the incredible sorrow that we walk with you through when we read your book. And like I said, I want to thank you for it. It seems to me to also be a story of your mother.
Yes.
And I went immediately on the website trying to track down more information about you. And so I learned quite a bit.
Yes.
And I was really delighted to find out you were speaking here tonight, and because I live so close. But I didn't find anything about your mother. And can you tell us a little bit about her? I mean, did she find joy later on in her life? Because it was such a difficult journey for her.
Well, you're not the only one to be curious about this and to ask me. Since the publication of the book, I have received so many deeply personal letters from readers saying the same thing that you have said, that the language moved them, the story moved them, but they also wonder what has happened to the mother. Has she been able to find joy? My mother is a deeply private person, so I will share with you what I can, what I feel that it is okay by her. She is happy. Her concerns now are very mundane. What will I cook for dinner tonight? And how can I best feed my children during the holiday? These things. But I want to share with you something that she said when she first read the book. She said, she called me up and she said many things, but one of the things that I feel it's okay to share with you, she said, I thought I lost that child. I did not know that you carried her with you all these years. And of course, that brought tears to my eyes. The book is also so much about her. Growing up in America, I always felt that our experience of diaspora is not only broken, but it's a silent one. And I had so many experiences in which at home, my mother would speak to me in our language. And it sounded, she has this beautiful way of articulating herself, and our language is beautiful, and I can hear that even in the rhythm of Cambodia existed in our house. But when she stepped outside of the home, she spoke in this broken English. And I felt that if I were to write a story one day, I wanted to capture not only the beauty that of the language with which I grew up hearing, but the way my mother spoke, the way my people spoke. I did not want my diaspora to be a broken one or a silent one. I want that experience to be felt through language.
Thank you.
Hello. My question is a little bit similar to one asked previously. I wanted to know how long did it take for the people to gain trust again in the system, to kind of feel that this kind of genocide won't happen? And the other question I have is, usually the people who are committing the genocides, they do believe that what they're doing is legitimate, and from my understanding, I'm only halfway of the book, where young people who really were given the power and guns, and they thought they were doing something right by killing all of these people who they thought were on the wrong path. My background, I'm from Somalia, and right now my country is kind of in that uncertainty situation where the people who committed most of the crimes, who are killing and who are using, people who are committing these suicide bombs, who are carrying the guns, who are one day joining Shabab, the other day are part of the civilians, are young generation who do not have education. They are in their late teens, 20s, and they mostly were born after the president was overthrown. So the generation that had the education were probably the ones that were born late 60s to 70s. My question is, what is the government doing to educate people about humanity and to prevent something like this from ever happening? Because I believe if the people who are committing crimes have knowledge of, general knowledge, they would not probably be committing genocides. This wasn't mostly about religion, this was a cause they believed, revolution. Is there any strict rules? Have they been prosecuted, and is the government doing anything to prevent something like that from ever happening?
You're talking about Cambodia, right?
Cambodia, yes.
Okay. Well, right now there is the tribunal. For me, it's very hard to see that the government is doing anything that can be something that is something, I don't know, you can put complete faith in, because so much of it is politicized and used for their own agenda. And I hesitate to talk about the government because you can never truly understand in a place like Cambodia what the intention of the government is. As you know, the people within the Cambodian government right now have had history as Khmer Rouge cadres themselves. So it is a tricky question. And right now the tribunal that is ongoing in Cambodia is to bring the topmost leader of the Khmer Rouge to trial, to hold them accountable for the crimes. So that's what is happening, and these are facts. In terms of educating people about genocide, or you also you have alluded to many things in terms of what kind of people committed violence and out of ignorance. Or for me, I think the way I look at it, it goes to something much more basic. I feel that these things occur because there's this basic fear of others, and that you can see extreme violence on a massive scale committed by soldiers like the Khmer Rouge soldiers, who were mostly illiterate, very young soldiers. And then you have only to look at the Holocaust to see that atrocity was committed by people who were very educated. So, and the only commonality that I can find in all these different scenarios is that there's this when there's this fundamental fear, and we allow that fear to grow to a proportion, and and to use that fear to justify or action to hurt and harm others, that's when the violence and atrocity on this scale can occur again. And in terms of teaching people to remember, to learn about genocide, you know, we can have museums, we can have exhibits, we can have programs and so forth, but for somebody who has lived through it, I feel that while we can learn about these things, we also, as human beings, have very short-term memories. We learned about something like this, then we forget. I can look at it in that way, but I can also take a more compassionate or humanistic perspective in the sense of, I think forgetfulness is a kind of survival mechanism. I think if we were to remember every single atrocity that has been committed in great graphic details, I don't think we can move forward as human beings. And I'm speaking from my own experience as someone who lived through it. There are certain moments when I feel that the only way to move forward, I felt the only way to move forward was just to forget some things for a certain time. But the danger is when we allow ourselves to be complacent, to forget it for too long.
I actually have one question.
Yes.
I'm going to ask it. Actually, it's two parts. The language in your book is totally metaphorical. It's beautiful. And I wondered how much your father, being a poet, played a role in that, or how much your own education played a role in that. And my second question is that you mentioned written reference Buddha and Buddhism, and you reference the Ramayana several times, and I wondered how much Hinduism and Buddhism played a role in your background.
Okay. You know, when I was writing the book, I wasn't thinking too much about the religion. As a writer, I simply endeavored to paint the emotional landscape of my characters. And because Cambodia is a very story-driven culture, you know, we every little thing has a story, has as if you know, every life, every being began with a story first, and that is our first consciousness is the story. When I write about Buddhist mythologies or Buddhist folk tales or allude to the Hindu gods, it's basically trying to capture the way Cambodians explain their world. It is a world so unpredictable that sometimes you have to believe that there are these competing deities in, I guess, choreographing our steps, because I think in a place like Cambodia, where you see so much tragedy and so much beauty, sometimes you don't have an explanation, an earthly explanation, so to speak, to really explain it all. And so I was merely trying to capture that. And what was the first part of your question?
Your metaphorical language.
Yes.
Do you attribute that to your father's poetry or to your education or
Yes, that's why I forgot it, because I didn't want to answer that. Because, because I think, again, for those who haven't read it, I don't want to answer it in a way where I give something away about the father's character until you get to the end of the book. But I will say this about the language. When I first came to the United States, coming out from an experience where I was mute and then was presented with this new language that was not only a language for me to it was not only an expression, a means of communication, but it was a voice that was completely separate from my tragic past. I embraced the English language. And yet I felt like the spoken English language, in particular the American English, the rhythm was off for me a bit. It was just too forward, too frank, too informal. And then I discovered the old British classics. And I thought, when I read Jane Eyre, I thought, these are my people. And I remember watching Wuthering Heights, first trying to read Wuthering Heights and not understanding much until my mentor introduced me to the black and white version of Wuthering Heights with Sir Laurence Olivier. And for the longest time, I was in love with Heathcliff. And, while people, while my peers were in love with all these rock stars and pop stars, I was walking around thinking of Heathcliff in Wuthering Heights. And you should have seen my first journal in high school. It was these long sentences that had no end, and I was trying very much to imitate that, because I recognize in that language a certain lyricism that was contained within a certain kind of formality, and that was Khmer, that was Cambodian to me.